FBI found DNA on a black glove discovered near Nancy Guthrie's home that appears to match the one worn by this person in his chilling doorbell video.
What investigators found inside Nancy Guthrie's home was never supposed to be there, and it may be the one mistake that exposes her kidnapper. What began as a troubling disappearance has now taken a far darker turn. An unusual item left behind at the scene is being carefully analyzed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who believe it could carry the fingerprints, DNA, or trace evidence needed to identify whoever took her. Why was this object left behind? And could this single discovery finally unravel the mystery of what happened to Nancy? Join us as we unravel the shocking FBI discovery and what it could mean. The odd item. Nancy Guthrie, a resident of Tucson, Arizona, went missing on February 1, 2026. She was last seen returning home after spending an evening with her family. Nancy, known for her private nature and close familial ties, disappeared suddenly, immediately drawing the attention of law enforcement agencies. Due to suspicious circumstances surrounding the case, including the narrow time frame of her disappearance, the investigation quickly escalated to involve federal authorities, including the FBI. In the days following her disappearance, investigators uncovered something shocking in her home that raised suspicions. Among these findings were approximately 16 gloves recovered from locations in and around Nancy's residence. Initial assessments were made, and it was stated that most of these gloves likely belonged to search volunteers and law enforcement personnel. They were left by them behind during search operations. However, a black glove in particular stood out and became a critical piece of evidence. This black glove was discovered roughly 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson. Its significance immediately caught the attention of investigators, as it appeared to have a direct connection to a masked individual recorded on surveillance footage outside Nancy's residence shortly before her disappearance. Law enforcement officials emphasized that this glove could provide a tangible link between the unknown person on camera and the ongoing federal investigation. The surveillance video, released by the FBI and Tucson police, revealed the suspect. The video shows a figure 5 feet, 9 inches to 5 feet, 10 inches tall, wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, wearing gloves, and approaching Nancy's front door within the minute she disappeared. Investigators have classified this individual as a person of interest. However, without any delay, the recovered black glove was sent to a certified forensic laboratory for analysis. Preliminary testing confirmed that the glove contained DNA that could identify the wearer. Federal investigators are now conducting quality control and procedural verification before entering the DNA profile into the National Combined DNA Index System, popularly known as CODIS. This black glove was evidence that Nancy's disappearance was not ordinary. The discovery of this DNA has provided a crucial lead in a critical case such as this. It also served as an important detail that helped shape the next phase of the federal investigation, as many other things were discovered. Investigators continue to examine the glove alongside other digital, physical, and environmental evidence collected from Nancy Guthrie's home and surrounding areas. While the investigation continues, a question stands. What really happened the night Nancy disappeared? Nancy's abnormal disappearance. The timeline of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance disturbed investigators not because it was chaotic, but because it appeared orderly right up until the moment everything changed. Nancy, an 84-year-old mother and grandmother, was last seen in the early morning hours of February 1, 2026. She was dropped off at her home in the Catalina Foothills area near Tucson, Arizona, by her son-in-law late the night before. According to the official timeline released by authorities, there were no recorded signs of distress or disturbance on the evening she was dropped off. That evening, Nancy had dinner with relatives and played games. and there were no reported arguments or tension that might have foreshadowed her disappearance. However, by the early hours of the following day, something had tragically gone wrong. Nancy was nowhere to be found. Family members became concerned when Nancy failed to show up at a regularly scheduled group gathering and could not be reached. Relatives arrived at her home early that morning and found no sign of her inside. Within minutes, a call was placed across the emergency number, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department responded shortly thereafter. Once they were on scene, deputies discovered Nancy's personal items, such as her phone, wallet, medications, and hearing aids still inside the home. Investigators believe the window time for her disappearance occurred between approximately 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. on that date. This was based on forensic data showing that her home security camera was disabled around 1:47 a.m. and that her pacemaker's app disconnected from her phone at about 2:28 a.m. Neighbors and local law enforcement later reported that Nancy was not seen or heard from after that time frame. This led to a factor that heightened concern because of her limited mobility and reliance on those items for her well-being. Given her age and health conditions, investigators concluded early in the investigation that she likely did not leave voluntarily. And by February 2nd, authorities publicly stated they believed she had been taken against her will. What the FBI initially noticed inside the home was that there were no obvious signs of a struggle or clear evidence of forced entry. This immediately raised suspicion within the families and investigators. That absence of chaos, coupled with the sudden disappearance during a narrow window overnight, prompted investigators to treat the residence as a crime scene and transition the case from a routine missing person inquiry to a criminal investigation with federal involvement. Nancy's disappearance had gone beyond assumptions and the normal. The authorities are compelled to investigate the matter further, and they return quietly to Nancy's home that night. What did the investigators find? The night investigators came back. Crime scenes are typically reintroduced only when new information emerges that requires re-evaluation of earlier conclusions. Investigators do not revisit a cleared scene simply to double-check. They do so because something in the evidence did not align with the investigative timeline or hypothesis. What happened in Nancy's case? Considering that a glove had been found and the DNA was the reason everyone had to wait, the FBI's return to Nancy's home that night was a shock. Initially, federal involvement in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance occurred rapidly, and that speed had a meaning to it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not typically assume a lead role in missing person cases unless there are indicators that extend beyond what the local police can handle. These indicators, such as digital evidence, potential interstate activity, or signs of coordinated behavior, fall outside the scope of a routine disappearance investigation. In Nancy's case, federal agents arrived on site quickly alongside local law enforcement, processed the residence, and documented what they found. The federal agents executed a clearing of the home, following standard protocols to photograph, record, and preserve evidence. That first processing appeared comprehensive, and the residence was formally released afterward. But subsequent developments prompted a return to the property. This was not a standard procedure. The decision to reinvestigate raised questions among the public and those closely tracking the case. It suggested that investigators encountered discrepancies or uncovered new data that may not have been fully assessed during the first analysis. A central concern in the Nancy case has been the narrow window in which she disappeared. The time her security camera and medical device app were disabled was roughly 4 to 5 hour periods, representing the critical timeline in which investigators believe the disappearance occurred. The compression of that time frame suggests either a highly opportunistic act by someone who knew when to act, or that Nancy left under circumstances that did not appear threatening to her at the time. The investigators noted that a person who leaves on their own whether due to a misunderstanding, coercion, or misdirection, alters the trajectory of an investigation. If she did not depart willingly, then the absence of visible disturbance at the scene becomes even more troubling. There were no publicly confirmed signs of forced entry or physical struggle reported at the residence. Those conditions suggest instead that the event was either planned or executed in a way that avoided physical confrontation. Yet it was believed that Nancy had been taken against her will. Federal involvement also became more expansive with the appearance of alleged ransom communications. Several messages claiming to represent demands related to Nancy's disappearance were circulated via email and media outreach. Although law enforcement urges caution about unverified ransom claims, the very presence of such communications can broaden investigative jurisdiction, particularly when messages traverse digital platforms or are disseminated across state or national lines. In Nancy's situation, the combination of a tight disappearance window, the lack of obvious physical disruption, and an unusual ransom-style communication prompted the escalation. What initially appeared to be a quiet residential disappearance quickly evolved into a case requiring forensic work. Now that the case has been reintroduced, with more serious issues to be addressed, what is the implication behind the revisit? The reason behind the sudden revisit? A return to a family residence in Nancy Guthrie's case does not automatically imply wrongdoing by relatives or associates. Instead, it signals the need to clarify or verify details that were previously overlooked or emerged after initial evidence processing. Late-night visits, such as the one observed at a family member's home during Nancy's investigation, are rarely spontaneous. They typically follow new information, digital evidence, timeline discrepancies, or leads that require direct confirmation within the physical environment. The personnel involved also provide clues about the purpose of the visit. Local deputies conducting follow-up activity, rather than federal crime scene teams with full forensic equipment, often indicate the action is administrative. During Nancy's case, investigators may have been photographing room layouts, confirming the placement of items referenced in interviews, or collecting objects previously identified as potentially relevant. The absence of forensic suits or specialized equipment suggests the revisit was focused on documenting and validating those details rather than searching for new physical evidence. Contamination is also a constant concern during investigative work. Forensic or biological testing requires strict protocols to prevent evidence compromise. Since such protocols were not observed during these revisits in Nancy's case, it reinforces the idea that investigators were reconciling information and refining timelines rather than conducting invasive testing. Family homes are revisited when investigators need to confirm exactly who was present, when they were there, and how movement within the residence aligns with other evidence. While the public may not know what was photographed or discussed, the visit itself communicates that investigators were narrowing their focus and validating critical details in real time. By the stage reached in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance investigation, authorities, including the FBI, had shifted from broad questions to targeted theories. Investigations are now focused on who is directing events. Are communications structured or improvised? Are responses reactive or anticipatory? These questions reveal whether the situation is orchestrated by an experienced individual or someone attempting to simulate control. Moreover, investigators evaluate whether ransom communications align with Nancy's disappearance or if they serve as a diversion or leverage. At this stage, separating what appears connected from what is truly relevant is critical. This is to ensure that every line of inquiry is anchored in verified evidence and specific to Nancy Guthrie's case. The revisit to the scene was only a part of the picture. The deepest part of the story was unfolding behind the screens. The digital trail behind the scenes. In modern investigations that are about missing persons, Digital evidence often becomes one of the most revealing sources of information, sometimes even more so than physical clues. Phones, Wi-Fi networks, security cameras, and smart devices generate timestamps and connection logs that can reconstruct a person's last known movements with precision. What these systems record is not subject to interpretation in the way eyewitness accounts are. There are only two projections. It either happened or it didn't. That is why investigators treat digital data with extreme caution. For the case of Nancy Guthrie, early briefings gave way to carefully worded statements and eventually near silence from authorities. That shift reflected a phase in the investigation where digital findings were still being verified and contextualized. Law enforcement officials frequently withhold partial or ambiguous technical data because premature disclosure can compromise the investigative process, alert someone monitoring the case, or undermine negotiation leverage if communication with potential suspects is ongoing. One challenge with digital evidence is accuracy. Analysts must align data from multiple sources. This includes her phone logs, internet routers, surveillance systems, and even connected medical devices to build a coherent timeline. Minor discrepancies in timestamps can significantly affect interpretations of when someone was last active or present in a location. Because of this complexity, investigators continue to analyze and cross-check information long before they feel confident enough to release details publicly. When authorities quiet down in a high-profile case, it often indicates that they are moving into a more focused stage of inquiry. Investigators are no longer gathering broad evidence. They are seeking specific details and awaiting forensic confirmation. At this point, any public release must be weighed carefully. Law enforcement officials know that even reassurance stating that certain evidence exists or has been analyzed can unintentionally inform or embolden individuals involved in the case. There is also a human dimension to consider. Families are sometimes shielded from unverified digital findings to prevent undue panic, false hope, or decisions based on incomplete information. Controlling the release of data helps law enforcement manage both the emotional and operational aspects of a complex investigation. Silence from the FBI on this case can be a protective measure, ensuring that critical leads are pursued without interference. In Nancy's case, the absence of frequent public updates about the investigation has led to speculation online and frustration among those following the story. But from an investigative standpoint, restraint is purposeful. When digital evidence reaches a threshold of relevance, investigators work to secure it thoroughly before exposing any part of it to public view. In complex cases, saying less can be the safest and most strategic choice, both for the integrity of the investigation and the well-being of those involved. As investigations continue in line with this case, the focus now shifts to what the way forward is and what the authorities plan to do next. The way forward in the situation. As days turned into weeks and critical deadlines approached in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance case, law enforcement agencies exercised heightened caution. Every decision is measured against potential risk, because a misstep could compromise communication, alert suspects, or escalate the situation. Investigators act deliberately and often without public explanation. This apparent silence reflects verification, analysis, and the methodical confirmation of evidence. Every timeline, every piece of communication, and every element of control is being carefully assessed before the next phase of the investigation begins. That phase, though rarely visible to the public, is effective enough. In cases involving potential ransom or controlled communications, deadlines are often misinterpreted by the public as endpoints. People expect exchanges, arrests, or announcements when a demand expires. For investigators, What occurs after a deadline can reveal far more than the demand itself. If communications continue past a deadline, analysts gain insight into the perpetrator's intent, strategy, and willingness to adapt. Conversely, silence is evaluated against established timelines, digital activity, and known behavioral patterns. It can indicate panic, confidence, or deliberate narrative manipulation. In Nancy Guthrie's case, investigators closely monitor these fluctuations to determine how much control the abductors truly exert. Nancy's children have also made a declaration to pay the abductors of their mother only if they would release her. In their words, they were ready to do anything to get their beloved mother released. The FBI also doubled the reward for information leading to an arrest or conviction to $100,000. Even if a ransom were paid, a scenario authorities work to prevent, the investigation would not slow. Payments create new evidence trails, expose patterns of movement, and increase opportunities to identify those responsible. Each transaction, communication, or attempt to exploit funds becomes a critical point of analysis. The FBI's objective is not only recovery, but accountability. Although it might take a while to get to the root of the matter now and find the suspect, the FBI has mentioned that they won't give up. Understanding who orchestrated the disappearance, how it was executed, and whether it could recur is as important as locating Nancy Guthrie herself. As the investigation unfolds, answers are unlikely to appear all at once. Findings may surface quietly through court filings, charges, or other formal confirmations long after the public has moved on. However, the groundwork laid in those early stages, the careful documentation of her home, the collection of digital evidence, the verification of timelines, and the monitoring of communications have set the trajectory for the entire case. Every measured action and calculated pause shows the fact that investigators are assembling a comprehensive understanding of the events surrounding Nancy's disappearance. Although, at this stage, authorities have not announced any arrests or publicly identified any suspects in connection with the glove or the surveillance footage. What stands out in this investigation is the precision and discretion displayed from the beginning. The evidence uncovered inside Nancy Guthrie's home, combined with the methodical tracking of her communications and movements, has placed the case on a path that cannot easily be reversed. When investigators reach a conclusion, it will not be influenced by speculation, media pressure, or public expectation. It will be grounded entirely in evidence, careful analysis, and the deliberate choices made during the critical hours following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. What do you think about Nancy's disappearance? As the investigation continues, do you think the clues left behind will eventually reveal who orchestrated her disappearance? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.